Hello everybody, I'm Bhavna, the founder of Mental Space Academy in India, and we in Mental Space Academy India are working to spread the awareness of this wonderful new paradigm which can improve the way therapy is done in India. And I am thrilled, I am delighted that Dr. Lucas Derks, who is a pioneer in this field, is in India and right here. Welcome, Dr. Derks. We are so happy to have you here.
Well, I'm really very happy to be here. Really delighted to be invited by you and to be your guest. And I can only say, you're such a super host.
The pleasure is all ours. The kind of insight that you have brought in with the mental space psychology, and the way I noticed there are more research emerging, neuroscience research, that validates the work that you have done before anybody thought about it. And perhaps, if it's okay, we will explore that in connection to the Indian culture and what's happening here.
Yeah, so what I want to emphasize before we do that is that when you have a new paradigm, the people who develop the paradigm is one, but the people who can recognize this as, this is a new step, are just as important. You're one of them.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. So within India, family is like a huge aspect of our, the way the society is made. And when I say family, it's not just, the husband and wife and kids, but the extended family. And I know you have done some interesting work with relation to family panorama and family relationships in mental space. Would you share with us how can we improve family relationships and the family therapy using mental space?
Yeah, you could say that the family panorama tool as part of mental space psychology, and it was the oldest development, the social panorama it's called. And it's in fact a cultural, in my view, neutral tool, so you can apply it everywhere in the world on any family. And of course, when you work in psychiatry or in psychotherapy, you apply it on the most craziest of families. And so I think there's no limitation from culture to that. Because it's just, as you know, finding the locations that people give in their mind to the other people, to their family members. The thing is that they are not aware of that they do this anyhow, so they walk around with this family in their mind, but they don't know, but they behave on the base of this. So this is what we discovered, the decisive thing, that they have this creation of who is where in their mind, and this is what makes up the family. And I think when you are in India, and probably maybe so we could hypothesize that the Indian families are more tight than the Swiss families or the Dutch families or the Finnish families, so and that will show in that there's this closeness, and everybody is very close to the person in their mind. Now, but we find that also in other cultures with individuals who have the same thing, and they have the same issues. And you could say that the person who when this is the case, when a person has all the other people very close, they feel very influenced and dependent, and especially when the other people are also higher than themselves. And so then they are not that much space to choose, and they're considering the ideas of the others much more than when there was much more distance. So and I think when this is the cultural pattern, you could say, well, in India, when you would be an anthropologist and using this as a tool to try to discover the cultural difference seen as it is in mental space, you could find something that some clients in my culture also do, and they complain about, I cannot make my own choices, and my life is directed by my family, so that this would be the case too. I don't know.
That's very fascinating. What I'm also finding fascinating is family therapy has often involved all members of the family sitting together and working. How do you do that in mental space? Do you just work with one person?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So, I know that you tried it out a lot, so you know that this is the practical advantage. So that, of course, the system therapy or family therapy, they had this idea of we need to have everybody there, and then we do confrontations or we explore who does what, and then you cannot call anybody guilty, but still there's this idea he's the bad guy, so then we don't talk about that. And this is a very complicated way of doing therapy. So I always admired people who were capable of working with a family. With couples I think it's extremely difficult, but with a family that's one of the hardest things that you can do. But this work has a different perspective. So in the sense that you think, well, you have a client. This client is suffering from some social behavior, and we don't know why, and often it's very deeply rooted. So you think, well, it could have something to do with the family background in childhood, or when it's a child, how the family is functioning around the child. But then still, it's how the child brings this to bear in their own mental map. So, because what you also can find, for instance, in twins, that one part of the twin suffers much more in the same family, where every actor is the same, but they have a different behavioral output and emotional output than the other one. And then when you would look at it through the eyes of the social panorama, you will find that the one twin maybe has more distance to the other family members in general, and doesn't care that much.
That's fascinating, because we tend to have these extended families, and if it's a single person who can rework and rethink their family by reconstructing their panorama, that I think is a huge leap for the family therapy field.
So I think it's also the beliefs that when you are in a culture where everything is so interconnected in a family, the therapist might easily believe that you need to work with this whole system and all these connections. But because they themselves are not so individualistic in their thinking. And you could say, well, this is a more individualistic approach, because you take the individual out of the family and you help them to rearrange what they already constructed themselves, maybe under the influence of the other family members, but they were the ones who constructed this family panorama, so where they put everyone, and you help them to reconstruct it, regardless of what the others do.
Because that's another point that I have heard clients talk about. I have made a shift, but my family members haven't, so how is this going to last, whatever? So would you speak a little more on that?
Well, I think that the social panorama could not be developed without NLP. So it's based on all the things of NLP, and in NLP you have this notion of ecology, and that comes into place when we talk about the effect of such a change, and so it could be that when the person changes their family in their mind, they become more assertive, make their own choices, become more authoritative, and so they could be much stronger, be perceived as more egocentric maybe by the others, and they may complain "Hey, we don't know you like this. What happened to you? So are you crazy?" But the client already knows,
Yes.
because they have all these inner representations of these people, so they know what the reactions could be, and so we help them in the ecology to help to the others to adapt to the new situation. And it could be a very little thing. But the others need to know that something shifted.
Yes.
And so when they get home, they say, "Well, I was with this therapist, and I noticed how good the family I have, and how nice people you are. But then still, I found out that I need to make a little bit more room for myself. Otherwise, I cannot develop my things."
Yes.
And when they tell this to their family members, when they act more assertive, they think, yeah, I see. So when they know that it's not a disrespect or a lack of appreciation for the family, but they know, okay, he changed something, and now, it happens, and it can be a good thing too.
Yes, yes. There is another form of therapy that's used quite often in India these days as the family constellation therapy, and they use the physical space. Would you speak on, I had read an article written by you wherein you looked at how mental space psychology can improve and enrich that process. Would you speak a bit on that?
Yeah, so family constellation therapy was already developed, but I didn't know when I started to do the social panorama, and this was a great opportunity because I developed the social panorama straight from NLP. And then I wrote articles about it, and then I got responses from the German area that, "Do you know Hellinger? Do you know family constellation therapy?" And I didn't know. So I went over the border to order a book of Hellinger because they were not available in my country. And then I saw, yes, this is such a confirmation of the principle of the importance of space in how people represent their social world. But then I also found that Hellinger then had certain philosophical ideas and more semi-religious ideas. So coming in, and also the role of the therapist is quite different. So I think there's a lot of difference between constellation therapists, but I was several times in his workshop, and there you see that the example he gave was being the expert who tells how to shift positions, and then at the end the client is ordered, take it. So when I would do it very blunt. So this is what you have to take in as the new situation. Now to me, this was not congruent with NLP, where we want the client to be the hero and have the idea that they did it themselves. And why was the therapist there anyway? So when they cannot remember what the therapist did, this is the best. Of course, for the therapist, this is very difficult. So to make that work in that manner, because they love to be seen too and appreciated. But when you look at the process of change, in fact, the best is when the therapist is forgotten by the client. And they change, in my view. And this was less the case in family constellation therapy. And I also know that some NLPers shifted to family constellation therapy because they love to be more active and have a hand in the solutions and so. But on another level, and that's a very basic level, you could say, well, what is a family panorama? A family panorama, in my view, is something that the person has in their mind, and that's a spatial representation of people around them. When you work with this, you see how flexible the mind is, and you learn that it's easy for the mind to represent this in any manner. So you can do it with sugar cubes or with puppets or with just things that you have, with pillows, with shoes, with anything, and also with real people. And then for the mind, they can easily translate what they see or what they have in mind to translate it in these objects. And then to them, this is enough to work on. And so when they change an ashtray, which is their father, then in their mind probably the image of the father moves out.
Yes.
So because the mind just can't keep track and be very flexible and just make use of such a suggestion.
Yes.
Now and then, of course, family constellation therapy, they use live people. And they let the person represent their family with these live people, living people. And so in the first stage of family constellation therapy, you could say it's totally equal to a family panorama, when the therapist makes notes and makes maybe a drawing of where, who is where, or puts it in symbols.
Right.
But the next stage in family constellation therapy is different. And this has to do with the what is the operator for change. In family constellation therapy, the operators for change are the representatives and their emotions, and also the ideas of the therapist. So when the therapist have an idea, yeah, you should move there, and the child should be there. So then this is how the change is made.
Okay.
And then the representatives, they may have all kinds of experiences that they are asked for, and so in these experiences of I get very hot, or this is I want to go away, or something like this, and this is also used in how to go about the changes in the configuration. Now and I think this is totally legitimate. So I have no problem, because I saw this work, and it's just a creative process. But now there's one disadvantage, and that is that you need all these people.
Yes.
So for a therapist with a private practice, yeah, this is not feasible to have always a group around. So that's why family constellation therapy is often confined to workshop with a group.
Yes.
And then of course you have people who work with symbols, and they do similar things, but that comes closer than to the social panorama. Now and then the preferred creativity in NLP tends to be resources.
Yes.
And then in the sense that you look for areas, parts, areas of strength or capacities in the client that can be applied to areas where they were not applied.
Yes.
And this is, you could say, has proven over the 45 years that NLP exists to be one of the strongest motors in change.
Yes.
And also change from the inside out.
Yes.
And so there's nothing that anybody else brings into a story when the client uses a resource. And so in the family panorama, this became the preferred mode of change. And so that is different than representatives, where you always need to believe that what they say fits. And this is, to me, one of the you could say philosophical issues with family constellation therapy, that the role and the legitimacy of the representatives, if what they feel and what they sense is the correct thing, that connects to the one who they represent.
Yes.
So when they represent grandfather and they feel something, you need to believe that what they feel is related to grandfather.
Yes.
And this is emphasized, and also a lot of people who do family constellationship therapy for the first time or second time, they often are totally fascinated by the magic that's in a way the bringing to life the dead or people who are not there.
Yes.
So and this is a sort of a level of magic that has always fascinated people, and you can see that in voodoo and in other things where people get possessed by the spirit of somebody else.
Yes.
And then when you believe that this is really possession in that case is really bringing the real spirit to life in the shape of the body of somebody else. So this is a very strong suggestion. So when you don't think critically about that, then yeah, it's totally fascinating.
Yes.
And it's also beautiful. So it has something.
Yes.
It breaks the boundary between life and death, and so it has many things people like.
Yes, yes.
And often this is put very central in the appreciation of family constellation therapy. And I think when you look at that, so with my colleague in Holland in the 90s, we wrote an article that was called Systemic Voodoo. And so we were looking at this aspect. So when you think of a cult, and you look at the rituals in a cult, and what works strongest, and then especially these type of possession-like experiences, maybe a shaman who becomes possessed by a spirit, or people in the group become possessed. They're not themselves anymore.
Yes.
So you could say there's a discontinuity of identity. They change into another identity. This is marveled. So this is what people love, and it has a great power, and it does a lot of good. And this is not so much in the family panorama. So this is not there. So when you love that, yeah, the family panorama is just a more dry tool where you can accomplish something. For a therapist, I think for a professional therapist, it's a tool that's more professional than another tool. But it's just a judge.
Yeah. I have experienced family constellation via mental space psychology, and it was interesting for me that when I associated into my 5-year-old self, I also was able to see this black wall on one side, which my therapist then worked on. And it was interesting because I have also seen and heard about your work on depression in awareness space and the black matter that exists. It was interesting that even as a child, when I identified, I was able to see a black matter at that moment, which I think gives a very different dimension to the way the work can be done compared to just physically moving or working with live people.
Yeah. So it's so when it comes to mental space psychology, where you think of all psychological phenomenon happening in space, so then it's just a form of deepening the modeling of subjective experience, but then with an emphasis on the dimension of space. So then you look at space as the primary organizing principle, and that means that when you see how important that is, that you can leave a lot of other stuff out. So that's in fact what happens in mental space psychology, that you, from an NLP perspective, you take this one submodality, location,
Yes.
and you do most of the work with that.
Yes, and so in NLP for so long, location was a submodality. But with your work, we have come to understand space is the primary organizing principle, which changes the way NLP can be done too.
Yeah, so it's you could say that Bentler did a super job by inventing submodalities, by seeing that when you just go at the sensory qualities of an imaginary image and then work on that could have a very strong effect. But he was a little bit bound to, I think, the presupposition that you should go through all the submodalities because this is for every person different. And mental space psychology and the social panorama is based on what I call population modeling, where you look at a lot of people and see that they share a lot in their subjective experience. And one thing that they share is that location is so important, and that when you look at that, with any given person, you already know so much more, and that's how we came to the priority of location. Now, and then the other thing is that in neuroscience there's a lot of evidence that says in a way that the brain is a navigator, so that it helps us to find our way, and any organism needs to find its way in the world. And then when you get more developed as an organism, which we are so arrogant to believe that we're more more developed, and you still use this operating system, had this navigational system to navigate, of course, the environment, but in the same way you navigate your own mind. And so when you try to remember something, you go on the search in your mind as if you are searching a building, or so you go, oh, where is that? Yeah, that was this. And the idea is that the operating system for the navigation is the same that what you use for, well, answering difficult questions or so.
Right, right. This is fascinating. Can I now bring in the concept of time with the mental space psychology? How do you, I know you have done work around time and space, and we in physics have understood it differently, and then in NLP there is a version about it. So would you speak some more about time and mental space?
Yeah, I think it's the time to speak about that.
Yes.
Yeah. When I was studying NLP, and in the 80s, so I think in 1988, so I heard for the first time about personal timeline. And it was at that time really fresh. It was developed by Stephen Conray Andreas, and later it was there was a book by Ted James and Wyatt Woodsmall on this, and I found it fascinating. And then later, and this is about decades later, I noticed that philosophers and anthropologists also start to study this, and then also in linguistics, and so I don't know, I cannot say that the roots were in NLP, because probably all these people didn't read NLP and didn't want to hear about NLP, but maybe it just came over NLP somewhere, but maybe it was just a parallel development. But in science these days there's a lot about the same, how people represent time. Now, and then already in the 80s it was clear that how people represent time is a very strong personality factor. That when you have a very long timeline, so when you see 2 years ahead at 100 meters in front of you, so you're probably a very relaxed type of person that thinks, I have lots of time. And when you have the 2 years here, you will be stressed out all the time, because it's already there and you need to do all these things to get ready for in 2 years time. So this is the most simple description of what's happening, and there's many more, and the varieties there are huge. So and when you start to look at people from this perspective, you can understand things that before you couldn't understand. You could only be irritated about. So couples, so that the woman has the future in front, and the man has the future somewhere there, and they are living together. And then when they talk about the holiday, for her it's already, she needs to start packing her suitcase, and for him, oh no, so and things like this could really make or break a marriage, or a cooperation between colleagues.
Yes. Now there's something you mentioned, that time tends to be personality driven, and yet there is also a cultural aspect, like there's like the work of the Incas with regards to the representation of time. Look, future is in the back and past is in the front. So how do you reconcile that it is personality driven, and yet it has these social groupings around?
Yeah, so but it's not genetic at all. So I think it's something that. So I imagine when it comes to these Indians that have their future in their back, so that when they are a child and that their father say, later when you grow up, and he makes this gesture, and by this gesture, this child already start to copy. Okay, the future is behind.
Okay.
And then cultural, you could say, yeah, these people have a great awareness of their ancestors, because nowadays they don't achieve that much. So, but their ancestors were the Incas. So, and they were considered to be one of the great cultures. And so, and everything ran down, and they cannot do much that the Incas could do, but still they have some practices and rituals that they do that they believe stemmed from their cultural roots. And then it's logical that this is so important, so that the past is in front, because you want to continue this fantastic past.
So it also connects to, for example, in India, there is the sense of the past life, of reincarnation. So the sense of the past is often very intense. Of course, we will soon explore what is the exact kind of social panorama we will see very soon. However, I have been fascinated that with the notion of reincarnation, how does the timeline kind of work through?
Yeah, so I think that so my idea about India is that it's I just was reading about it, that the whole culture has a very long history, so maybe more than 20,000 years continuity. So then this of course is probably the same as with the Incas, that people are aware of, that the rituals from the past are honoring these roots, and that to stay with this is to stay with your own values, etc. And so that there's some very solid things, and that now reincarnation, I think, is a belief that helps to deal with death, and when you're not satisfied with your life, you can have another one. So I had this experience with a person, and he was a piano player, and he married also to a piano player. And he said, well, my chances to become the piano player that I could have been were reduced, because she always interfered with my exercising. And so he complained about his wife, and he said, next time in my next life I will not marry. I think this made it for him possible to stay with his wife. So because he thought, now you're here, next life I will not marry, and I will be the musician I want to be. Now I'm myself, I do not believe in reincarnation, but I believe very much in the value for therapy, and in the value for giving your life a solid philosophical basis. And I think it's equivalent to any other way, because people need ways to organize themselves in eternity, in the cosmos.
I'm fascinated by your spiritual panorama work. I've seen many therapists which don't include where the beliefs and the world from which people come in. And in spiritual panorama, I noticed that there is a place, and you work with whatever their belief system is. For example, in India, there is a lot of connection with the ancestors, and ancestors play a very present role in some cases, and a strong connection with the various deities, the gods and saints, with whom people seem to have a direct connection and relationship. And I find the spiritual panorama work to be fascinating in that regard. I have had clients who have said, God has abandoned me. Why does he punish me again and again? And I wonder how spiritual panorama can explore these kind of relationships with the cosmos within the mental space.
Yeah, so you could use it as a religious anthropologist to explore how people create their spiritual world spatially. So this is as a research tool, and I think this is a great potential, because you find interesting similarities, because the cosmology is taught in a certain way, so people may say probably God, and they point upwards. Then there's no choice where to put God. But there's cultures where the spirits are on a tree out of the village, or in the underworld. So when the earth, the underworld, is the holy place, so it will be somewhere else. And so then in this culture there will be these type of similarities. But when we work with the individual client, then even when they belong to the same religion or culture, there may still be a huge deviation among them, how they represent things, and how they do that, can be the difference between having a good relationship or feeling abandoned by God, or so. So, and then, and for the therapist that works with the spiritual panorama, they can work fully, in my idea, transcultural. So you don't need to have any idea about the spiritual and how the deities are organized yourself to work with that, because it's neutral. So, and that's I think a great advantage in a multicultural society.
Yes.
Where you have as a therapist, you get somebody who complains about bad spirits or about ghosts or about being or a haunted house or whatever thing you may not believe in, or you think it's not ethical, or it's and you have your own answers to that, and you can leave that out. So this is and then save a lot of time and resistance that you call for when you try to preach instead of do therapy.
Yes. And thank you for that. One more question I had was with the crowds. In India, there is the space is less, and people tend to share the physical space. And I was wondering, how does your physical living and sharing of space, is there an interconnection between the physical crowding and the state of mental space? Or?
I don't know. So I think I had not the opportunity to look at this question. So I've been teaching this in Japan, which is also a very crowded place, in Tokyo. It didn't come up as an issue, but what I can imagine that so something that was perceived with people from Asian countries where there's a huge population, that that the self experience is less important, so that people often feel themselves more insignificant, and the others, and powerful others, but maybe also the masses, the others as masses, dominating them. And we know that this is different from the United States, where you could say grandiosity is much more the standard. So where people are raised, you can everything, you can be everything you want, and you can be the president if you like. So when you're the president, you are the most important person in the world, and that's given as an opportunity for everybody. Now I think this is this cultural background may play into how you deal with this, but the representation of the self is an important tool in the social panorama, because it works with relationships, and relationships are always the combination of how I see myself and how I see the others. And how I see myself maybe just as important or maybe more important, and having a tool to change this view on myself, which is a view that's often not aware. So people are just what they think they are, but they have no choice to turn the dials, so to change something intentionally. So a lot of people are not aware that they can do something there, and I think for society where there's so many people, and where you feel dissolved in the masses, it might be useful to still have a strong idea about yourself. I don't know. So we live also with a lot of people in the Netherlands, so on a small space, but not that many. So we have only 60 million in a small space, and so I think the space is maybe 4 times that of Mumbai or so, or 5 times, and the population is less.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing this wide array of possibilities of therapeutic interventions using mental space psychology. The work that you can do with your family therapy being re-envisioned through the mental space psychology. The sense of time is becoming more richer with mental space psychology, and the spiritual panorama, the way by which you can work across with cosmos and use that as a therapeutic intervention. I think that's very radical in the way therapy can be done. And I'm excited that mental space psychology is now available in India, and that Dr. Lucas Derks is teaching a course in Social Panorama this weekend, and he'll be coming again next year with mental space psychology course. It just broadens the horizon, making therapeutic interventions simpler as well as culturally useful and context-driven, which I think again improves the way we can work with multiple clients with multiple backgrounds. And it's fascinating, as you have said, that in next 10 years this is perhaps going to be the most radical form of doing psychotherapy.
And you will be part of that.
I thank you so much for this interview and for this moment of exploring what mental space psychology is.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yes.